Something very mysterious happened to Roger and Garp at the end of the God Valley incident. When Roger talks about the final attack he's going to do with Garp against rocks, Roger says that the attack will take all 3 of them out of commission. When we also first heard about the God Valley incident from Sengoku, he said that the island itself literally vanished after the event. What this means is that not only were Roger and Garp the only surviving witnesses who know what exactly caused God Valley to vanish, but that some outside factor had to play a role in them getting off the island alive. I think this could be set up for a far crazier twist than most readers are expecting, where I think that the thing that caused God Valley to disappear was not the world government, but that Roger and Garp encountered something far more ancient on this island, someone the One Piece story has foreshadowed for over 20 years. While I will later break down what I mean by this, I first have to bring up the fact that I do not think we will see this true ending of the God Valley incident in this current flashback. The way this chapter ends very likely means that the God Valley portion of the Elba flashback is now done, where this is essentially beat for beat how the story also ended the God Valley portion of Kuma's flashback in the previous arc. Where just like in Kuma's story, I think this is where we transition back to the main flashback. I think there is however a very good reason why the manga decided to resort to its second God Valley cliffhanger. This was likely because the ultimate fate of this incident is being saved for a special meeting in the final saga. During the Egghead arc, Garp became a prisoner of the Blackbeard pirates, but what we did not yet know at this point was just how interested Blackbeard is in talking to Garp. Blackbeard has now not only been revealed as the son of Rocksteady Xebec, but God Valley itself is also revealed to be the island of his clan. But even on top of this, Blackbeard himself was actually at the island during the incident, where this was pretty much the event that shaped the rest of his life. I am fairly certain that at some point in the near future, we will get to see Blackbeard have a scene with Garp, where this would be when we finally learn the true fate of both God Valley and Rocksteady Xebec. I seriously doubt that this final attack Roger and Garp did on rocks at the end of this chapter was Xebec's true death scene, but that it's more than likely being saved for a future moment in the story. Rox is not only one of the most significant characters in One Piece's lore, but he's also now one of the story's quintessential flashback characters. While One Piece can be squeamish about death scenes in the present timeline, in flashback, characters like Rox without fail always get very significant scenes to end their lives. As Xebec is a legend on the same level as Roger and Whitebeard, as well as one of One Piece's key flashback characters, it is essentially guaranteed that he too will get his own grand death scene, far beyond him crying and not saying anything while getting attacked by Garp and Roger. The reason why the manga however likely cannot show this to us yet is because revealing the fate of Rox now could ruin a twist the story is setting up to happen right when we return back to the present time. This twist being the Straw Hats finally learning how to counter Domi Reversi. The big mystery we've been building up this entire arc is the crew finding a way to counter Imu's powers. This mystery arguably already started in the Egghead arc, when the story for the first time showed the 5 elders in action. But the Elbaf arc is clearly where we are finally going to get the answer to this question. We've in this arc already seen that there is a way to counter the Celestial Dragon's regeneration with Conqueror's Haki, but the way to do this has also been presented as a puzzle the Straw Hats themselves need to solve. This puzzle however goes way beyond just countering regeneration. The far more important part is the Straw Hats learning how to undo Domi Reversi. The idea that this ability can be reversed has already been hinted at a lot in the story. When Imu first used Domi Reversi on Dorian Brogy, the immediate reaction of all the other giants and the Straw Hats was that they wanted to turn them back to normal. This idea actually gets repeated in this flashback, where Garp and Roger also want to undo Xebec's transformation, rather than just killing him. By the way, since you've watched this video this far, definitely subscribe to the channel, since I'm genuinely preparing to drop a metric ton of new content before the end of the year. I think it's very possible that Xebec did actually in some way manage to come back from Domi Reversi after his fight with Roger and Garp, and that this is how he was still able to die as himself, like every other major flashback character before him. I understand if a lot of readers would be peeved if the manga did yet another God Valley cliffhanger, but the truth is that this would hardly be the first time something like this has happened. One Piece is basically the cliffhanger story to end all cliffhanger stories, where readers being left on hold for years before finally finding out what happened is something that happens in One Piece on a regular basis. By far the most ridiculous example of this has to be Sabo's reverie mission. This is going to take a minute, and I understand that this video already has a lot of detours, but I just really want to hit this point home. All the way back in chapter 908, we are left with a cliffhanger of Sabo and his commanders preparing a suicide mission to rescue Kuma. Then in chapter 925, we find out that the revolutionaries during this mission actually had to fight both Fujitora and Green Bull. In chapter 956, Dragon and the rest of the army read the news that something bad happened with Sabo and the others during the reverie. Jump forward to chapter 1037, where we get a scene of the 5 elders themselves saying that this year's reverie was accursed. Jump forward again to chapter 1054, where we finally get some information about what happened, where it's revealed that the revolutionaries actually did manage to rescue Kuma, but also that Sabo was also shockingly blamed for killing Cobra. Then in chapter 1058, we find out that the rest of the commanders got back safely, but that we still do not know what truly happened, and that Sabo is still AWOL. Then in chapter 1060, Sabo turns out to still be alive. He didn't kill Cobra, but he instead discovered some dark secret about the government. Yet before he can even finish his sentence, we get hit with yet another cliffhanger. Then finally, in chapter 1082, almost 200 chapters and 5 years since this subplot began, Sabo finally returns to Dragon, and we get to hear the full story of what happened. This is all just to say that if we don't get more God Valley content in the next chapter, it wouldn't be unexpected. Yet what this Sabo example also proves is that One Piece ultimately does deliver on its cliffhangers. Eventually. Once Blackbeard in the present story has his meeting with Garp, Teach may not however just learn how his father really died, but Garp's story could also provide an incredibly vital piece of information for Blackbeard in the final war. Garp likely has no intention of telling someone like Blackbeard anything, but conveniently, Teach already has a way of accessing Garp's mind without his approval, where the Blackbeard pirates have just captured the user of the memory devil fruit. While Garp's Haki might normally be too strong for someone like Pudding to be able to use a devil fruit power on him, Garp currently appears to be chained to Sea Stone. This was something that was brought up in Wano, where potent Sea Stone can even suppress a character's Haki. This potent Sea Stone is also seemingly available even outside Wano. The Marines, for example, thought that nameless executioners were able to kill a Haki user like Ace. If the Blackbeard pirates have used this kind of Sea Stone on Garp, his Haki should basically be offline, so Pudding should be able to read his mind without a problem. Learning the truth about God Valley should genuinely be one of the most important moments for Blackbeard's character in the story. Teach clearly reveres the memory of his father, where he has even named his flagship the Saber of Xebec, but is also otherwise clearly trying to emulate his legacy, such as by taking down traitorous former Rocks pirates. But on top of Teach finally getting some closure with his father, reading Garp's mind could also give Blackbeard the answer how he could counter Imu's powers. It's pretty clear that Imu and the world government are the great enemies of Blackbeard's life, where everything bad that happened to him was because of them. It's also pretty clear that taking down the world government is the big plan Blackbeard has been hatching all these years, where this is seemingly the thing all his operations revolve around. Teach finally learning how to counter Domi Reversi could therefore be one of the final steps he's been waiting to take before facing Imu. This would actually echo the words of his mother, where Eris at God Valley said that Xebec simply had not been ready to face Imu yet, which to me implies that Xebec himself actually had a concrete plan to beat Imu and the government. There is however arguably something even more important about the ending of the God Valley incident than just Xebec's ultimate fate, which is the fate of the island itself. This could genuinely be a mind-blowing twist, where despite the similarities, we know that the weapon that was used to destroy Lulusia Kingdom was not used on God Valley, meaning that there had to be another force in the world at this point in the timeline, capable of wiping countries off the map. Yet I do not think this force belonged to the world government. I think that God Valley's disappearance was the doing of a character just as ancient as Imu, who's personally connected to both Xebec and Blackbeard. While I wanted to include this idea in the video, I simply ended up writing way too much about it, where this theory now requires its own separate video. I'll try to upload it to this channel as soon as possible, but if it's already uploaded when you're watching this, you can click here to learn why I think that the one who sank God Valley was Davy D. Jones, who may very well not only still be alive in the current story, but there are a ton of hints in the manga that he is in fact the sea god mentioned in the Harley text, who's been at war with Imu for over 800 years. Interestingly, this latest chapter is actually one of the rare cases where the One Piece canon has been thoroughly retconned. What I'm talking about is the revelation that Roger remained behind on God Valley even after his crew sailed away. This is because in volume 4 billion, Oda actually showed this same scene, but Roger here was actually with his crew as they escaped, where the Roger pirates immediately discovered baby Shanks after leaving the island. This is very interesting, as very recently, movie tie-in material has become more and more relevant to the canon story, not only with things like Shiki's devil fruit, or the creatures from Strong World appearing in the manga, but also with something like Douglas Bullet making his first appearance with the Roger pirates. Granted, this scene of the Roger pirates leaving God Valley had actually been retconned already in the past, where both it and its movie adaptation showed Roger with a mustache, when we now know that he hadn't yet grown one at this point in the story. Some might take this as an example that Oda's other works, like SBS or these movie booklets, are not canon, but to me, there's way too many cases of this bonus material turning out to be relevant in the manga for this to be an honest take. Even here, this material from volume 4 billion is literally how we knew Shanks came from God Valley before this flashback. I think the real take is that retcons just sometimes happen, whether it's inside material or even in the actual manga. Roger in this chapter, I think also all but confirmed something the manga has been flirting with for a while, which is that characters pretty much always use armament Haki when doing Conqueror's Haki attacks. Or this is at least my interpretation. This was something first hinted by Kaido, when he said this exact same thing about Luffy's attacks, but I think with Roger's words backing Kaido up, this likely means that all One Piece characters fight like this. There's really no reason not to do this, other than maybe stamina, where combining both armament and Conqueror's Haki should unlock the maximum potential of your attacks. There's also the fact that armament Haki can do things that Conquerors cannot, where even Roger here says that it is armament, not Conquerors, that counters devil fruit powers. I think this means that whether it's Law not being able to use shambles on Big Mom and Kaido, or Law himself countering Doc Q's powers, these were instances of characters using armament Haki. I am personally a big fan of this, where I intensely dislike how powerful Conqueror's Haki currently is in the story. So armament Haki still having its place in the power system is a big plus to me, but it also gives me hope that even at the end of the story, some of the very strongest characters will be non-Conqueror's Haki users. Having just said that, this chapter also brought up something I'm not sure I'm a fan of with Haki, which is Roger and Garp seemingly not being able to damage Xebec unless they go all out with their Conqueror's Haki. This is something I feel like One Piece flip-flops a lot on, where for example, in Zoro vs Pika, Zoro said that their clash would be decided by whoever had the strongest Haki, yet from my reading, One Piece characters are still able to hurt characters with stronger Haki. The best example of this is Luffy vs Katakuri, where Katakuri literally says that his armament Haki is superior to Luffy's, yet Luffy is still able to damage him. I'm not sure if there is just some nuance here that I'm missing, but I feel like Garp has to be exaggerating, where his and Roger's attacks are still damaging Xebec, but it is just not enough to actually beat him. I think these final attacks the both of them did on Xebec were also really cool, even though he's using a sword. The way this panel is drawn makes it look like Roger basically blasted Xebec with a shotgun, but Garp's move is what's truly interesting here, where he's basically doing his own version of Luffy's Gatling. It makes sense, since Garp was the one who originally trained Luffy, but what this really made me think is that maybe Garp also taught Dragon how to brawl, and that we will in the final saga also see Dragon display his own version of what I now suppose is the Monkey family's fighting style. I gotta say though, Xebec himself was the furthest thing from cool in this chapter. Even though I like the way a lot of these panels were drawn, this fight pretty much felt like a dog being put down. I genuinely hope Xebec still has his ultimate death scene to come, where this really is just such a bad way for him to go, especially in a story where far less legendary characters have gotten far better final scenes. There's even fake death scenes in the story, with way more weight than what happened here with Xebec, if this is actually his last scene. Though I guess this brings up the idea that maybe Xebec actually survived God Valley and could even still be alive in the current story. I still do not know about this theory, since I would assume that many of the Rocks pirates had to have Xebec's Vivre card, yet they all seemingly think that he died. This is a side point, but I think the existence of Vivre cards showing that a person is alive is also why Pudding is so certain that Big Mom survived the events of Wano. It's a nice note to Blackbeard that Xebec in his fight with Roger and Garp ended up losing a tooth, though just like his son, Xebec magically regrows it in the very next scene. I don't personally believe this is anything more than a drawing error, but if you have theories about the significance of Blackbeard's constantly changing teeth, maybe this is evidence that you can use, that his dad has the same condition. Before I talk about everything else about this chapter outside the fight, I have several questions about Garp. I think the most obvious one is his reason for staying with the Navy after God Valley being just to protect the Marines. I think this would be a fine reason under different circumstances, where ultimately Garp may just think that he's one man whose rebellion against the government would end up being pointless, where he may think that he can do more good from the inside. However, at least to me, Garp has throughout the series still been way too gung-ho about the Navy for him to have seen what he saw on God Valley. Even after witnessing the native hunting competitions and learning that the government is basically being ruled by demons who not only attack Marines but also wield powers beyond any normal devil fruits, Garp still thought it was a good idea for all the kids he raised to become Marines. Not only this, but Garp is also completely livid when he discovers that said kids became criminals. This even went for Dragon, whose only goal is simply taking out those exact demons that Garp himself hates at the top of the government. I suppose the most likely answer is that Garp just wanted his family to protect the Marines from the inside just like him. I'm still not, however, satisfied with this answer, since at least to me, the God Valley incident is evidence that the Celestial Dragons are an immensely bigger threat to the world than any pirate, where Garp by all logic should have been thrilled at his son fighting against them, considering what he knew. I am, however, even more confused by the government seemingly keeping Garp around for years, with no strings attached. There's really no sense I see in this, where they knew for a fact that Garp had turned on them and had witnessed their darker side, yet were perfectly willing to keep him as a Marine, despite having no guarantees of his loyalty. Just for some context, the elders thought Cobra seeing Imu earned him the death sentence, and even Cobra in his mind agreed, calling his actions the greatest taboo in the world. I suppose the ironclad rule of the One Piece story, of the government's actions never making any sense, still holds true, but I sure wish it didn't happen so often. My other point about Garp here is that I do not think him hearing Xebec's thoughts necessarily means that he has the voice of all things. While it's possible, a lot of random characters in Wano were also able to hear Luffy's thoughts. The way I see it, the real tell for a character having the voice of all things is that they can actually communicate with it, just like what Xebec is doing in this chapter. I suppose another tell is that characters with the voice of all things can also hear the thoughts of animals, where for example, no one but Roger, Oden, Luffy and Momo have been able to hear Shueisha. My next Garp point is about Roger asking him to join his crew. I think it's really sweet, but this also highlights something else from this chapter, which is how well the two seem to fight together. I think this all possibly hints to the idea that Roger and Garp have perhaps known each other since they were kids in the East Blue, and that even though they are rivals, they are also lifelong friends. Characters like Xebec and Roger in this flashback, playing with the idea of Garp becoming a pirate, actually makes me wonder if this could be the origin story between Garp and Roger, where maybe they as kids had some Mickey Mouse pirate crew together, kind of like the Usopp Pirates or something, since there is still that one image of Garp as a kid, where he's even seen carrying treasure. My last point about Garp in this chapter is him saying that he came to God Valley for both Roger and Rocks. This may technically be true, but it's honestly just a white lie, where we pretty much know for a definitive fact that Roger was more than 99% of the reason why Garp came here. The two having their Arnold moment by telling their guys that they'll be back is really neat, and definitely echoes the many times Luffy himself has had moments like this in the manga, though for some reason I doubt that this was the titular echo of this chapter. For the record, Rayleigh and Gaban were also being very insubordinate in this chapter, where they didn't actually follow Roger's commands and leave the island. This was actually another thing that confused me, where surely, if they were staying, they would have gone to help Roger fight Xebec. Yet then they were nowhere to be seen. I would also assume that some considerable amount of time passed in this chapter, where even the weather on the island changed. I genuinely have no clue what Rayleigh and Gaban did here. So please, if you have any ideas, educate me in the comments. What I do however have ideas on is this exchange between Big Mom and Kaido. I'll keep it brief though, and reiterate my point that these two still have a role to play in the final saga. You can even click here to watch my most recent video about why I still think that Big Mom is coming back this very arc as Elbaf's ultimate main antagonist. It's one of my few theories that I view as an actual prediction, and not just me toying with story ideas. I'll actually use this as a segue to talk about one of my ideas that didn't come true, which is Whitebeard not in fact sticking around with Xebec till the end, but basically abandoning him after he turned into a demon. I suppose Whitebeard thought that Rocks attacking him meant that their partnership was over, which I suppose makes sense, since Whitebeard's later iron rule on the Whitebeard pirates was that internal fighting was forbidden. This Marco lookalike from the flashback also does turn out to be an actual character in the story, where he's a Whitebeard fan who's a captain of his own crew. I however think the introduction of this character is incredibly foreboding. For whatever reason, this man was nowhere to be seen by the time of the Oden flashback, by which point Whitebeard was basically captaining a crew full of teenagers. It could actually be that something bad happened with these Polo pirates, where they may have actually all died, leading to Whitebeard taking care of their kids. It would be really sad, but it would also provide such a good backstory to Whitebeard, who'd never even before been a captain, yet still ended up forming his own crew full of orphans and outcasts. I feel like I end up talking about the same topics in a lot of my videos, where the most frequent ones are Big Mom coming back in Elbaf, and Whitebeard being the best One Piece character. But hey, at least they're honest takes. There's actually a pretty good joke here with this Graham Polo character, which is that Whitebeard told Oden that his previous crew was basically full of douchebags. Maybe Whitebeard actually wasn't referring to the Rocks pirates, but actually to this Polo guy. I'm just saying, the man's haircut was already a crime, yet he didn't just stop there, but also decided to brainwash his kid into copying it. I thought Kyo's line in this chapter about taking a ship that wasn't Xebec's was really confusing. I would think that Kyo thinking that Rocks was never coming back would mean that his ship was up for grabs. I guess this scene would be a hint that Xebec's ship is still out there somewhere in the world, which is pretty interesting, since the Oro Jackson has also been mysteriously MIA in every scene after Roger's crew disbanded. My guess is that the Oro Jackson could still be with Gaban, where Oda in the newest SPS said that he as the navigator loved traveling around, even as an old man, and we know he went all the way to Reverse Mountain just to have drinks with Crocus. Sailing the open seas with the most notorious pirate ship in history sounds nuts, but I think Gaban has more than proven how much of a wild man he is. For the record, I like Rayleigh, but Gaban is easily Roger's most interesting crewmate in my eyes. This flashback is already pretty packed, but I'm hoping we get to see how he eventually moved to Elbaf and decided to build a family there, since it's such an interesting story. And the manga has also set up a couple unanswered questions with Gaban, like why he started wearing a straw hat, or how he got his scar. This scene of Saturn sailing off the island could honestly be incredibly important, since this is our first time seeing Imo truly possessing someone other than Kunko. Kunko is still clearly special, where I still think that she has her own version of multiple personalities going on, with the changing of her eye color. Still, Imo being able to possess characters other than her is nuts. If Imo is for example able to do this to all the celestial dragons, they really are screwed as a people, where Imo at this point can not only kill them at basically the push of a button, or to possibly turn them into demons, but Imo could also seemingly just take over their bodies at will. This also opens the door for a lot of interesting theories about Imo's true identity. Basically, because he has these possession powers, Imo could have secretly been some random character in the story. If One Piece really wants to blow our socks off, it should reveal that Imo was Saint Charlos this entire time. Granted, I may be getting ahead of myself. Maybe this isn't actual possession, and Saturn just had a meeting with Kizaru's dealer right before this scene. Dragon in this chapter threatening to execute marines if they don't obey him is pretty dark, but it could very well be that he's just bluffing. I do however wonder if Dragon would have actually gone through with his threat if the Marines had gone against him. These Marines are ultimately just soldiers following orders, so Dragon actually shooting them would be pretty hardcore, especially since he's only 17 here. I have to say though, even this God Valley flashback didn't yet turn Dragon into an interesting character for me. This is kind of becoming a trend with every time we learn more about Dragon's life, where to be very blunt, the execution is always pretty lukewarm. The idea of Dragon being the one who rescued Shanks was extremely interesting on paper, but so far, the execution had almost no agency, where Shanks by pure accident ended up with Roger, without Dragon even realizing it. I can only hope that Dragon did later connect the dots, where his and Shanks' shared past did actually become a relevant part of the story sometime after God Valley. Gilbastar apparently being the former user of Perona's fruit is pretty crazy, since we know he later became one of Moria's zombies. I suppose this could even mean that Moria personally killed him before taking the fruit. Even though Moria killing a former Rocks pirate may sound crazy, this could have actually been Prime Kosuke Moria before he got fat, so who knows. My last point about the chapter is that I found Gloriosa hitching a ride with the Roger pirates to be really cute. It's also pretty smart. Not only do the other Rocks pirates probably have no real loyalty towards Gloriosa with Xebec gone, but this really just shows how persistent she is in getting Roger's affection. I guess this means that she also got to hang around with Haki, so the Oro Jackson really was the place to be. Or maybe this is actually the explanation for why Rayleigh and Gaban decided to remain behind on God Valley. Maybe Gloriosa and Haki immediately started nagging at each other on the ship, and the Wings just couldn't deal with it. Now that the God Valley incident is seemingly done, we'll probably soon head back to what actually happened between Loki and Harald in this flashback, which likely also means finally getting to see Elbaf's legendary devil fruit. Or maybe not. If you're interested, you can click here to watch my other video, where I go over why Loki did not likely even eat this fruit, but that Elbaf's legendary devil fruit was stolen by none other than Saint Figarland Garling. Thank you to all my members for their plunder. Huge props to everyone who watched this video to the end. Take it easy.